Please, no! No! No!
Welcome back to another video. So today's video will actually just be part 2 of the video I made earlier on how I passed the California bar exam on my first try. I try to fit it all into one video, so if you have not watched part 2, then I highly recommend it, because these videos were literally shot in one piece, but I had to divide it because it was becoming too long and I wanted to keep all the juicy details and my personal experience within the advice. So I didn't want to cut it out and make it that dry. So it's in 2 parts. Please check out part 1 if you haven't. If you have already, welcome back to part 2. I hope this is very helpful to you, and let's get right into it. Number 4. So this kind of goes to my earlier point, but more specifically to essays and MBE. I think that all the bar study programs have a lot of practice built in, and I simply would not get discouraged by it. I know somebody asked me in a prior video, shout out to that person, about MBE, so I'm gonna address it right here for MBE and essays. You don't want to get bogged down by how well you're doing or how bad you're doing. If you're doing really well, you don't want to think that, oh, anything that gets thrown at you, you'll be able to like karate chop and everything's just gonna be perfect. Like, you don't want to be overconfident, because that will catch up to you no matter who you are, unless you're just this perfect human being, but unfortunately I doubt it. And so you shouldn't get bogged down if you are doing poorly. I think there is like a certain limit to it. Obviously, every practice set of MBE you might not be doing that well. Generally I was shooting for that, like, I think it's on average, I think you need to get around like 62% on MBE to pass or something like that. I think it deviates a little bit, like a few percentage here or there. So I think that's a very low standard to shoot for, but you have to realize that MBE questions are like very hard and tricky, and so you shouldn't necessarily shoot for 100% every time. You should try to shoot for 100%, but my point is that if you fall short, you should not be discouraged. Obviously you only need around like 62% to pass, so that should be like the bare minimum essentially that you're shooting for. And if you get 62%, you know, obviously if it was a different case, you'd be like, oh man, like 62%, I'm a failure, that's like a D- and stuff. But you have to realize this is the bar exam. Don't get bogged down by how well you're doing per se, or how poorly you're doing. By the end, you should be able to understand more than you know. Especially with MBE, I think you learn the tricks on the wording of like different answer choices, different questions and stuff like that. So I think that's something to like recognize along the way, so you don't get frustrated or you don't get overwhelmed and stuff like that. Things like that might happen. It is bar study, it is very important, but you shouldn't let it like mentally affect you, because that will take a toll on your like study process and everything. Same thing with essays. Barbary only graded, I think, like 4 essays, maybe. It wasn't that many. I think other bar study programs allow you to submit more essays. Barbary kind of had these pre-selected essays that you could submit. If I'm being completely honest, I didn't do that amazing on them, and that did actually bog me down. So I'm telling you that, like, don't let it psych you out. You know, like, I actually did research on it, and a lot of people were saying like Barbary graders didn't care that much, and I'm not like bashing Barbary. Obviously it helped me pass, but you know, there were people saying that, you know, they get paid by the essay, so they're kind of rushing through it. Some people were saying that they did a lot poorer on the actual bar exam, and they still passed, even though Barbary graders were like grading like their essays harder and stuff like that. So, you know, take everything with a grain of salt. Obviously, if you're doing poorly, then you should ensure that you will be able to understand everything by the time the day comes. You have to understand that you will not know everything perfectly. So you have to take that into consideration, that you will not know everything perfectly by the end, but you need to shoot for as close as perfection as you could get to. Don't get bogged down by how you're doing along the way. But, you know, obviously you'll learn more along the way. So by the time the end comes, you will know more than you would have maybe on your first like 20 quizzes or whatever you took, and maybe you didn't do that well. Obviously you learned from them. I think I would highly recommend that you go through everything. Whenever you do an essay, look at the samples. Whenever you're doing MBE practice sets, look at the answer keys. You will learn stuff. You'll probably learn a lot of nuances from the explanations and sample answers. So you definitely want to look into that. I know it takes time, but it definitely will be worth it. I actually took parts of the explanations or sample answers from essays and I added them to my notes, like stuff that I didn't know. And there are a lot of nuances that aren't mentioned in lectures, so that's definitely stuff that you should look out for. And that should be helpful. Number 5. So I think taking notes is something that I mentioned earlier, kind of vaguely, but you do want to take good notes. You do want to be paying attention to lectures. A lot of nuances come from sample sets of MBE and essays, so that's kind of where you get your nuances. You get the general bulk of information from the lectures. Barbary had outlines. I'm sure other programs have outlines too, so kind of reflect on that. Generally speaking, I studied the notes more heavily, and my notes had bits and pieces, like I said, from sample answers and explanations. And I kind of pulled out certain things from the outlines that seemed like pretty big points that weren't mentioned in the lectures themselves, or they were just like points that kind of explained parts of the lectures even better, so I kind of understood everything a little bit better, so I pulled those out, and the lecture notes kind of became this perfect place to like refer to everything, because I had bits and pieces of the outlines, I had bits and pieces of all the MBE questions, I had bits and pieces of the sample answers to essays and stuff like that. Obviously your notes can get lengthy, but you know, I think it's better to have everything in one place, at least for me, than be like scattering around for different things, especially when it comes to like sample answers to essays and explanations to MBE practice. Most likely, you know, you're gonna do like thousands of like MBE questions. You're not gonna go back on week 10 to the stuff you did in week 1. So it's better to like build it into your lecture notes, kind of like I did, and I think that was helpful. So I never really had to refer back, because I had the main points from like all these other resources in one section, or like one place I should say, and that was really helpful. Number 6. So a lot of people have different point of views on this, but I pretty much stuck to my bar study program. So whatever it is, you know, you might want to stick to it. I had friends who stuck to their bar study programs. I did Barbary, other people did Kaplan, other people that I know did Barbary as well. So we pretty much stuck to it. And we didn't really need to refer to supplements. Obviously, like I said, it's kind of hard to tell exactly where you're at, because you're growing knowledge, whether you know it or not, through time. So, you know, unless you're doing very poorly, I wouldn't necessarily look at supplements. I think your bar study program, whatever it is, will have all the resources you need. For example, Barbary had so many extra resources that I never even touched. I think in about like week 9 or something, which was coming up, very close to the bar exam, I figured out that I had this book that I didn't even know about. I literally had all my books stacked, and I just didn't even realize that like there was like this whole book that I had never even used up to that point. So it kind of goes to show you that there are additional resources within your bar study program, most likely, that you won't even like cover in terms of like the weekly assignments you have and stuff like that. So they do give you additional resources. I didn't really go to supplements. My friends didn't either. So that's something to consider. Obviously, if you really feel like your bar study program sucks and you need outside supplements or something like that, then it's better to look at it sooner than later. Number 7. So this kind of goes back to the previous point. I think it was point number 2 when I was talking about having not too much fun and stuff like that. I think people were saying that they were in the best shape of their lives during bar study because they were exercising. And, you know, like law school is kind of like you're dealing with a bunch of stuff all at once, and bar study is kind of like this one program that you're dealing with. Obviously a lot encompasses it, but you are just working on one thing, and that kind of allows you to do other things that maybe you were not able to do in law school. So now you can focus on maybe like cooking good food, maybe you're focusing on exercising, maybe you rather like kill more time watching Netflix and stuff like that. And when it came to me, I actually did not work out like whatsoever. I mean, it might be your cup of tea. During a lot of 2019, I was actually like working out and stuff, and I kind of stopped when school started again, for obvious reasons, and bar study came in, and you know, most people want to have a getaway, and exercise is their getaway. But I think you should take everything with a grain of salt, even when it comes to that. You know, a lot of people will say they're exercising, they're eating healthy, they're making sure they're like on track, especially when it comes to eating healthy and it's helping them focus and stuff like that. Take it with a grain of salt. I kind of did none of that. I wasn't eating like McDonald's every day, or like whatever, like fast food, or you know, unhealthy stuff. So I wasn't like going that far, but I definitely wasn't eating like carrots and like chomping down lettuce while like studying for the bar exam and whatnot. Kind of do what's best for you. I know that it's probably more logical to be eating healthy and doing all of that, so your brain is like functioning well and you're not like high off sugar and stuff like that. But I don't think it's like necessary, like I don't think it's necessarily a deal breaker that you're like eating brownies every night like me, or like eating cookies every night like me. Well, not every night, but you get the point. Not eating healthy and stuff like that. So something to definitely take into consideration. Well, I guess that is pretty much it. That was part 2. Thank you all for watching. If you survived through part 1 and 2, remember to like, share, and subscribe. Thank you guys all for coming along for the ride for part 1 and 2. I know it was kind of a long segment, but I hope it was very helpful for you. I wish you the best of luck. I hope all of you pass.